Known as the son of Eddie Brock, Dylan Brock has created quite some history in Marvel Comics ever since he was first introduced in the 4th volume of Venom Comics in 2018. Created by Donny and Iban Coello, Dylan Brock's character came into being after Anne Weying bonded with the Venom symbiote. This led to a series of events which eventually led to Dylan Brock's creation and his eventual connection to the Venom symbiote. Today we will be exploring his origins, relationship with Eddie Brock, and key anatomical features, among other things. So let's dive right in. But before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Who is Dylan Brock? Dylan Brock's birth was a result of some tragic circumstances that befell Anne Weying after she came across the Sin Eater. The encounter left her with fatal wounds, and Eddie Brock stepped in to save her life by transferring the Venom symbiote to Anne and effectively turning her into She-Venom. During the transfer, there was a moment when both of them were bonded to the symbiote, which formed a mental and physical connection. Even after Eddie summoned the symbiote back, some part of it, called the Codex, still lingered within Anne's body, and it was not long before she discovered that she was pregnant. In no time, the Codex attached itself to a fetus and led to Dylan's birth, but the entire ordeal was too much for Anne to handle. She ended up leaving Dylan with Eddie's father, Carl Brock, and intended to return at some point. Unfortunately, she couldn't go through her life after everything she had endured, and she took her life while Carl raised Dylan and even gave him all the love that he had denied Eddie. However, he was still tough on Dylan, who was sometimes subjected to physical abuse at his grandfather's hands. How did Dylan discover Eddie was his father? For about 9 years, Dylan was completely unaware of his father's existence or that he was Eddie Brock. After government agents from Project Oversight started following Eddie, he decided that he had no option but to seek shelter at Carl's place and even tend to his injuries. However, Carl asked him to go away when he arrived at their doorstep and even assured Dylan that he was a nobody. About a month after this incident, Eddie once again came to Carl's house in the hopes of making amends for their relationship, but he struggled to retain control over the Venom symbiote. While he went away once again, Dylan started believing that Eddie might be his older half-brother, and he even tracked him down after Carl had once again physically abused him. Dylan then asked Eddie if he wanted to help him kill their father, and much to one's surprise, Eddie thought that this was a good idea. The two started planning things, but Eddie soon suffered a PTSD flashback that compelled him to attack Dylan. He resisted this impulse to the point where he ended up in a coma, and Dylan then rushed to take him to the hospital where the Maker told him that Eddie possibly had cancer. He further elaborated that he might be dying of his illness and that he had plans to remove the Venom symbiote from his body, even if it meant killing Eddie in the process. After learning all about the Maker's plans, Dylan's luck only seemed to worsen as Carl tracked him down and ordered him to return home. Moreover, Dylan was adamant about not returning to an abusive environment and started running away, but not for long, as Carl eventually tracked him down in a janitor's closet. He then forced him to get into a car, and the two got into a heated argument over Eddie. While Dylan seemed to admire that Eddie didn't try to hide his true nature, Carl almost hit the young child when the Venom symbiote intervened and stopped him. This alien biomass had been trying to seek redemption, and freeing Dylan from Carl's abusive clutches seemed to be one of its many attempts to better itself. It then left Carl in the middle of a desert and sent Dylan back to the hospital, declaring that it was trying to be better and that they would be better off in its absence. Dylan assumed that Eddie might be inside the symbiote, but the biomass soon disintegrated into the ground while Eddie remained unconscious. Soon enough, Eddie regained consciousness, and Dylan told him about the symbiote's attempts to save them before disappearing into nothingness. While Dylan was still unaware that Eddie was his father, the latter had learned this information with some help from the symbiote, but had chosen to keep it a secret. What role did Dylan play in Absolute Carnage? Soon enough, Eddie decided to take Dylan along to New York just before the War of the Realms. They stayed in Rex Strickland's warehouse, and they bonded for a few days as Dylan recovered from a cold. However, their bliss was only temporary, as Eddie's longtime enemy, Carnage, started hunting them down. Carnage had bonded to an offshoot of the Grendel symbiote and was on a mission to release the dark god Null. To succeed in this mission, Carnage needed to consume the codexes of all other symbiote hosts, and Dylan ended up in trouble with it before his father's symbiote rescued him. He then met one of Eddie's oldest rivals, Spider-Man, and immediately decided that he didn't like him. After a tiresome adventure, Dylan headed back to the warehouse, where he came across Reed Richards' evil alternate universe version, the Maker and Spider-Man's godson, Normie Osborn. It turned out that the Carnage symbiote had bonded itself to Normie with some help from Norman Osborn, and Dylan was left alone with him while Eddie and Spider-Man embarked on an adventure to find Norman. In the meantime, Dylan formed a solid friendship with Normie and even put his foot down when the Maker tried to test his Codex symbiote, and his troubles seemed endless as a bunch of symbiotes tracked them down to the warehouse. Dylan then rushed to safety with Normie and even fought against Phage when the Venom symbiote's spawn Sleeper stepped in to save them. He attempted to transfer to Dylan, but the Maker got a hold of it and killed it along with other recent symbiote creations. Dylan tried his best to subdue him, and even unleashed the Life Foundation symbiotes to subdue the Maker. But the plan backfired when they merged into the hybrid and started attacking them. Finally, Wolverine, Captain America, Spider-Man, and the Thing intervened and saved Dylan as well as Sleeper. Once again, Sleeper tried to bond with Dylan, but the latter repelled it as his symbiote powers were activated out of nowhere. Dylan then took control over Sleeper and turned it into a gigantic wolf to get rid of the hybrid, and he then reconciled with this entity while Eddie also made a safe return. When Eddie was under attack by Dark Carnage, Dylan and Normie stayed back with Spider-Man and urged them to escape through the tunnels. They ended up in trouble with the carnageized Norman Osborn, and Spider-Man tried his best to defend them but fell unconscious. Dylan and Normie were then under attack, but Dylan's powers were activated in the heat of the moment, and he managed to save the day. The attack took a toll on him, and he fell unconscious soon after while Eddie and Dark Carnage came tumbling down the tunnel's roof. At this point, Eddie had bonded to a symbiote created by the Scythe-extracted codices, while Dark Carnage had bonded to the Venom symbiote. Eddie was then given the choice of either saving Dylan or killing him to get the Venom symbiote back, but both these options would have eventually unleashed Null. At this moment, Eddie revealed that Dylan was his son before manifesting a Necrosword and killing Dark Carnage. He then absorbed the Venom and Grendel symbiotes, and Dylan worked up the courage to ask Eddie if he was really his father once everyone else had dispersed. He then made an excuse and ran away, breaking down over the fact that Eddie abandoned him with Carl in an abusive environment. Dylan's vulnerability also caused Eddie to tear up as he apologized for his past actions and promised never to abandon his son again. How did Dylan become the new Venom? As time passed, Dylan and Normie lived at Harry Osborn's house, and he was soon plagued by terrible nightmares of Null. He started recording these visions in a diary, and his powers even enabled him to see through the eyes of the Venom and Carnage symbiotes. He then teamed up with Eddie to defeat Null, and his powers allowed him to experience Carnage as he hunted for his father. Over time, Carnage managed to bond to Eddie with the intentions of killing his dear ones, and Dylan then created a portal from the Carnage offshoot to save his father. As he passed through it, Dylan possessed and communicated with the Venom symbiote and even turned it into a Tyrannosaurus Rex to rescue Eddie. He further possessed the vicious symbiote that lurked around his father's cage, and he showed great bravery in the face of danger as Carnage tracked him down and kicked him out of the portal. He fell off the roof, and Sleeper came to his rescue and urged him to sever himself from the hive mind. While Dylan was adamant about staying connected to it, Eddie encouraged him to proceed and assured him he would remain by his side. This powered Dylan to finally destruct Carnage's offshoot, compelling the symbiote's main body to leave Eddie alone. Dylan was once again back with his father, and they both wondered what they could do about Dylan's powers. Finally, they decided to pay the Maker a visit, but this attempt was futile as the Maker had already managed to find a way to bond to the Venom symbiote from his universe. Things soon got out of hand as Virus revealed himself and attacked them in order to get back at Eddie, and all this chaos caused Maker's interdimensional portal to send them all into an alternative universe ruled by symbiotes. Dylan soon felt overwhelmed after interacting with this hive, while the Avengers of this universe showed up and captured Virus and Eddie. Somehow, Dylan and Venom managed to escape and stumbled upon the underground resistance, including the counterpart of Dylan's dead mother, Anne Weying. The Resistance's costumes and appearances were similar to Agent Venom, and Annie gave Dylan some context and introduced him to other members, such as Wade Wilson, Peter Parker, Cletus Cassidy, and Andy Benton. Eddie soon appeared and tried to fight Cletus over their past, but their fight was cut short as the other symbiotes showed up. Soon enough, Dylan caught Agent Deadpool as he revealed the explosives he had implanted within his body, since his healing factor would help him restore his body in no time. They soon rushed to the Resistance's base to dodge the symbiotes and were greeted by an erratic Reed Richards. Annie then revealed that Dylan was actually the Hive's leader, Codex, in this alternate reality, but Dylan only wanted to have an honest conversation with his mother. However, Annie tried to dodge him out of guilt, and the thought of making amends overwhelmed her. While Deadpool came back with a decapitated head, a symbiote scorpion sought Dylan out and eventually revealed himself to be Mac Gargan. The Resistance prepared themselves to fight him while Dylan continued to seek Annie out. They managed to have a conversation about the past, and Dylan felt like he had finally gained motherly love after they hugged. As part of their game plan, the Resistance merged Dylan's memories with his Codex version in this alternate universe, restoring humanity in this world before he ended up in a coma. He then regained consciousness, and Dylan and Eddie decided to stay back on Earth 1051 to spend time with Annie. After a year, Otto and Reed Richards created a machine to send them back home around the same time as Null's return. What powers does Dylan Brock possess? Like other Venom symbiote hosts, Dylan Brock had superhuman abilities such as enhanced strength, speed, and agility. He also had enhanced stamina and reflexes, as well as enhanced durability that helped him dodge his opponent's attacks and strike them when they least expected it. In the case of injuries, he also had a regenerative healing factor that allowed him to completely heal from injuries as severe as gunshot wounds to his chest. Dylan also had superhuman senses and spider sense immunity, as well as wall-crawling abilities like his rival Spider-Man. He also had genetic memory, night vision, shape-shifting powers, and the ability to generate matter out of thin air. He once generated chains from his wrists and used them to swing around, which was an extension of his constituent matter generation and manipulation abilities. Dylan also had the ability to turn invisible, as well as resist any telepathic attacks. Dylan could also transfer and absorb energy, and he had the unique ability of empathetic empowerment, which enabled him to feed off others' emotions. As a result of his hybrid physiology, Dylan seemingly appeared to be a normal human being, with a piece of the Venom symbiote incarnated into his being. He has venomous fangs, and his white and blue eyes changed color to black as soon as his powers were activated. Sometimes tendrils emerged from the corner of his eyes, and red or white spirals replaced his irises. Initially, Dylan did not have the ability to exert conscious control over his powers, and they often activated on their own stressful conditions. With time, he relied on Null's guidance and instructions to exert better control over his powers, and even used them consciously. But Mr. Fantastic analyzed his powers and declared that he did not get his powers from Null. In fact, Dylan gained his powers from the God of Light, even if Null's consciousness had tried to take over Dylan's body after he lost his physical form. Eddie Brock then extracted Null's consciousness from his son's body with the help of the Unipower, which turned Dylan into a normal human being. Eventually, Dylan did reclaim his powers from the Venom symbiote despite Eddie's best attempts to hide them, and he could then transform into Codex and bond to a symbiote to access his powers. Since Dylan was a hybrid, he would lose his connection to the Hive as soon as he bonded with a symbiote, but at the same time, this would kickstart an evolutionary process to strengthen the symbiote. How did Dylan's transformation into Codex happen? How did he become the Prince in Black? During the event known as the War Against the Absent Throne, Eddie was preoccupied with his role as the King in Black. He would often leave Dylan unattended for extended amounts of time, and the Venom symbiote would also leave his body to wander around the city. Dylan felt quite lonely and abandoned until one night his father woke him up in a rush and declared that they had to leave. Soon enough, Dylan got a call from Eddie while he was packing, and he learned that the man in his home was an imposter and that he had to dodge him and make a quick escape. Dylan somehow managed to escape and head to a motel in central New York, and Sleeper accompanied him in this nighttime adventure. However, they had no idea about what was set in store for him, and a military helicopter came out of nowhere and attacked the motel with a rocket. While Eddie ended up dying in the motel, Dylan dodged it and then ran towards the destroyed property when the Venom symbiote stepped in. Dylan then bonded with it even if it went against what his father wanted, and he soon went insane and killed all the soldiers around him to avenge his father. He then escaped with Sleeper and the Venom symbiote and followed some of his father's instructions through voicemail to meet his old friend Archer Lyle. They continued to evade the Life Foundation, and Archer even told Dylan all about her research on Absent Throne. Dylan and Sleeper even accompanied Archer to a research facility, unaware that Archer had been plotting with Alchemax's CEO, Liz Allen, to capture Dylan. Moreover, Dylan left the Venom symbiote behind when he stepped out, and the researchers soon started experimenting with him while Eddie Brock seemingly controlled the other captured symbiotes in the facility. While he had allegedly died, Eddie was controlling these symbiotes to merge them and free his son. Dylan briefly got a chance to talk to Eddie's consciousness, and he then rushed to find Sleeper and escape the facility. They did run into trouble with the guards, but the Venom symbiote appeared in the nick of time and saved the day. After escaping from Alchemax, the three of them lingered at Jake Yakin's bar and learned he had a biker gang in California. Soon after, they got into trouble with another biker gang, and Dylan and Venom tried to return to the bar to call Jake. Unfortunately, Venom had been attacked by the Bedlam symbiote, and they couldn't reach Jake in time, which resulted in the latter's death. Dylan also managed to talk to Bedlam, who revealed that he was a King in Black and that he hoped to make Venom stronger than ever. He then assumed his human form, and Dylan realized that the Bedlam symbiote was none other than Eddie. The symbiote then attacked Dylan and left him mortally wounded, while the Venom symbiote was also greatly weakened and had no option but to extract his consciousness into a codex. While the symbiote then escaped, the Life Foundation got their hands on Dylan's body, and they put him on life support. On the other hand, things were stirring up inside the Venom symbiote's mental world, wherein Dylan's codex was being attacked by corrupt manifestations. A hooded entity known as the Keeper also showed up in this world and explained that Dylan would need to return his body in order to survive. The Keeper further told him that it was about time for him to know his origins, and then he revealed himself to be a copy of Eddie's memories before challenging him to a battle. Dylan immediately put his foot down, and the Keeper then bonded his symbiote to Dylan's astral form to drag him to the Venom world. Dylan then learned the true nature of his creation and even managed to summon the all-black Necrosword in an impressive series of events. Sleeper then took Dylan's body to Baywater to help him rebond with the dying Venom symbiote, and he then assumed a human form similar to his Earth 1051 self. He then started calling himself Codex and immediately began building an army to save Eddie. He allied with Norman Osborn and even got into trouble with Miss Marvel while fighting against Eddie's current form as the Bedlam symbiote. While the Goblin Queen showed up and teleported Bedlam away, Eddie spent time with Miss Marvel and Sleeper as they discussed his decision to become a symbiote. Around this time, Alchemax and the Life Foundation were both determined to get their hands on Eddie, and they paid the new enforcers to track him down. Dylan then went to Moon Knight for some help, and they managed to defeat the new enforcers together. He then confided in Moon Knight about a weird sound he had been hearing all around, and the latter helped him track the sound to Sarnak. Unfortunately, Sarnak had already turned himself in by the time they located him in order to dodge Moon Knight, and the two had no more missions left together. Dylan and Moon Knight soon parted ways, and it wasn't long before Agatha Harkness kidnapped Dylan and took him to England. Here they came across Deadpool and learned that Agatha would give him and the other symbiotes a souvenir full of chaos magic only if they defeated Deadpool on her behalf. While Dylan managed to defeat Deadpool, Agatha didn't stick to her promise and even abducted him to use him in one of her dark magic rituals. Under her spell, Dylan and the symbiotes fought against the Avengers, but were eventually freed from her clutches once they figured out how to break free from her mind control. At this point, Dylan thought it was imperative to create a group of his own to defeat the Absent Throne, and he started by recruiting Sleeper, Red Goblin, Toxin, and Flexo. He also began working in a warehouse, where Carnage massacred all his co-workers in cold blood to leave a message for Dylan. He left hints to follow him, and Dylan then embarked on a mission to confront the reborn Cletus Cassidy. The fight was a painful one, and Dylan suffered immense pain until Carnage finally removed the Venom symbiote from Dylan and then stabbed him in the heart. After a lot of chaos, Dylan and the Carnage symbiote passed across the Unbeyond and even encountered eventuality and had visions from the past. This being also healed Dylan's body and sent him back to the real world without any more connections with the symbiote. Dylan then decided to seek refuge with Bren and Toxin, who helped him with lodgings and told him all about the vampires that had blackened the skies and their suspicions about Null's return. Dylan assured them that Null would never come back, but he secretly felt sad over losing his powers and the ability to turn into Codex without bonding to a symbiote. He was also quite revolted by the Venom symbiote's deepest secrets and seemed to find it everywhere he went. In fact, he also came across a priest who told him that he had now transformed into a vampire after an interaction with Venom, and Dylan had to fight him off before he could turn him as well. Dylan continued to have nightmares about everything that he had endured until Flexo and Sleeper confronted him about his state. He then met his future self, who explained that he needed to alter some historical moments to set things straight and asked for young Dylan's help. Dylan gathered his team and even met his father to tell him that he did not have Venom anymore after learning about their past deeds, while Eddie told him about Venom's future in the Venom world. Eddie then asked Dylan about Venom's current host when Spider-Man appeared at the scene and declared that he was now bonded to the symbiote. He stated that he had a conversation with Venom, and they decided that it was best for him to bond with it since both Dylan and Eddie seemed to be unsafe hosts. This conversation saddened Eddie to a great extent, who felt betrayed by Venom as well as Peter. He then decided to merge with Bedlam again, and got into a fight with Peter. As things got serious, Dylan merged with Flexo and Sleeper to assume his role as the Prince in Black, and break their fight up. This compelled Eddie to unbond with Bedlam and offer a truce instead of hurting his son. But Flexo had other thoughts, and he persuaded Dylan to fight against his father anyway. He even managed to take complete control over Dylan and lunged at an already weakened Eddie. Sleeper and Rascal stepped in to get rid of Flexo, but Spider-Man continued attacking Eddie, and the ordeal left him on the cusp of death. Finally, Venom realized that Eddie and Dylan were greatly weakened without the symbiote, and that they did need it to survive. Additionally, Spider-Man glanced at his future and saw that he would become the King in Black if he continued to be bonded to it. He decided to give it up and rebond Eddie and Dylan with the symbiote, and they immediately retook their older forms as Codex and Venom. They also hoped that they would neutralize the threats in both their futures by being bonded to the symbiote together, and their first task was to get rid of Bedlam. They ripped his head apart with all black, but Bedlam continued to fight until Agent Anti-Venom showed up and killed him. Eddie and Flash then got into trouble with the Zombiotes, who started spreading their infection as soon as they arrived. Dylan was also at the scene, suggesting they could use the Anti-Venom and Eddie's powers as the King in Black to heal the Zombiotes' infection. Eddie managed to control Anti-Venom as it had a few traces of his DNA in his system, and then sent a surge through the hive mind to treat all the Zombiotes. However, things went downhill from here as Eddie's future version, Meridius, got his hands on All Blood and combined it with the King in Black's powers to corrupt the Symbiotes. This resulted in them turning into Carnage, and Dylan had no feasible option except to kill Eddie and get rid of this infestation. With a heavy heart, he used All Black to impale his father and seemingly killed him at the end of this story arc. How does Dylan handle his relationship with Eddie? Even though Dylan had a somewhat complicated relationship with his father, he was a lot like him, and they shared several traits. Just like Eddie, Dylan had a strong sense of justice, and he once even scolded his father for presuming that the waiter was a war veteran. At the same time, Dylan understood Eddie's struggles, and he often expressed his admiration towards his attempts to become a better person. Dylan did turn to the dark side under Null's influence to the point where he wanted to spread his warship, and he threatened to kill anyone who came in his way. However, this cruel and manipulative side didn't last for too long, and he was back to working with Eddie in no time after regaining his senses. When Eddie disappeared along with the Venom symbiote, Dylan felt abandoned and channeled these feelings into hatred. This caused him to get into petty disputes at school, and his father's alleged death was the last blow he needed before bonding with Venom. He soon turned to insanity and went on a rampage, and his hatred was so extreme that he found himself getting scared by the Venom symbiote. The symbiote also reminded him of his father and how much he missed him terribly, but he took these things in stride and often argued with the symbiote to assume the role of a heroic vigilante. Can Dylan Brock control other symbiotes? Just like other symbiote hosts, Dylan has the ability to sense and forcibly repel any symbiotes that try to bond with him. He can dominate other symbiotes against their will to the point where he can even kill them in dire situations. Dylan could also remote pilot symbiotes due to his connection to the symbiote hive, and he was the only one capable of doing this besides Null. However, he was incapable of bonding with other symbiotes, and any attempt to do so would result in excruciating pain for the other hosts. Who would win in a fight, Dylan Brock's Venom or Eddie Brock's Venom? While both Eddie and Dylan's Venom operate in similar manners, they have their unique personalities and ways of dealing with conflict. Dylan has his youth on his side, while Eddie has much more experience and strength on account of being way older than his son. At the same time, Dylan had his fair share of roller coaster life experiences as he discovered the truth about his existence and grew stronger while dealing with his symbiote, and several sequences in the comics suggest that he just might win in a fight against his father. The odds are entirely stacked in his favor, as he's inherited his father's abilities as well as Norman Osborn's alliance. While he seems to have an advantage over his father, hardcore Venom fans would understandably still root for Eddie, even if canon suggests otherwise. Marvelous verdict. And with that, we've explored Dylan Brock's life history as well as all of his fascinating powers and abilities. There's no doubt that he had a roller coaster of a life, and so many of his life experiences and personality characteristics have been influenced by the Venom symbiote. We hope you had fun exploring his life story with us, and we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one, and be safe. Thanks, everyone.